So let's take a look at carbohydrates first. The reason they have the name carbohydrates is that if you take a look at their chemical formula, so they're CH2O, and they have a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio of carbon to hydrogen to oxygen. So if we take a look at the chemical formula, for example, for glucose, that would be C6H12O6. And you can see that there's a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio of carbon to hydrogen to oxygen. So you can see that it's carbon with water, so you can see where carbohydrate actually came from. So that's where the name actually comes from. So the functions of carbohydrate, they're two different functions. So glucose, for example, is a fast energy source for our cells. So we can quickly break down glucose and use that as a really quick energy source. And then we can also store glucose for later. So we can actually join together a bunch of glucose molecules and make glycogen. And so that can be used later on. And then the other important function for carbohydrates would be for structural support. We don't use it for that in our body really, but in other organisms they do use it for structural support. So the monomer of carbohydrates is the monosaccharide, and mono just means one, so it literally means one sugar. And then we also have disaccharides, which are just two monosaccharides joined together. And then if you have three or more monosaccharides joined together, that would be your polymer, which are called polysaccharides. And these polysaccharides are also called complex carbohydrates. So to fill in our blanks here, the monomer, the building block or subunit for carbohydrates would be the monosaccharides. And then our polymer would be the polysaccharides. And then carbohydrates are polar molecules. So they're covalent bonds where they're going to be unequally sharing the electrons. So we're going to have some partial negative and positive charges where the electrons are not spending equal amounts of time around the atoms. And that's actually going to attract water. So our carbohydrates will dissolve in water. So they like to mix with water. And the way you can remember that is if you put sugar into water, it dissolves very easily. And here are just some examples of the monomer of our carbohydrates, the monosaccharides. And what you'll see with a lot of our carbohydrates, the name usually ends in "-ose". So here are just some examples of monosaccharides. We have glucose, fructose, which is usually found in fruits and vegetables, and then we have galactose, which is a monosaccharide which is found in milk. And then we have disaccharides, which are two monosaccharides joined together. So here's sucrose, which is table sugar, and then lactose, which is the disaccharide found in milk. And the type of reaction that is used to form a disaccharide would be dehydration synthesis reaction. So here we've got two monosaccharides, two glucoses, which we're going to join together. We're going to squeeze out or dehydrate. We're going to remove the water molecule and join the glucoses together with that covalent bond, and then we form maltose, so that disaccharide. And then here's glucose and fructose being joined together by a dehydration synthesis reaction, and we form table sugar or sucrose. Okay, and then polysaccharides are polymer of the carbohydrates with many monosaccharides joined together. We have some energy storage polysaccharides, and the two that we have there are glycogen, which we actually find in our cells and other animal cells, And then the other one we find is in plants, which is starch. And then the structural polysaccharides would be cellulose, which we find in plants, makes up their cell walls. And then the other one is called chitin. So let's just take a look at some pictures of these. So here we've got, up here we've got starch, which is just an energy storage polysaccharide in plants. So we just have a bunch of glucoses that have been joined together, so you can see they form this really long polymer. And then the plant, when they are running low on glucose, they can just chop off these glucoses and then use that as an energy source. And then what we do to store extra glucose when we want it to be available for later is we store it as glycogen. And we store this in our skeletal muscle cells and our liver. And so we just join a bunch of these these glucose molecules together. And then when we're running low on glucose, maybe we haven't eaten for a while, we'll just chop off these glucoses and then we'll make those available, send those out into the blood, and then other cells can use that for energy. And then here's cellulose. This is just a structural polysaccharide that plants will use. They have just a bunch of glucoses joined together, so a nice big long polysaccharide or polymer. And the cellulose just forms these fibers, and that will form their cell wall. So that'll help give structure to the plant cells. And then we have chitin, which is another structural polysaccharide, and this one is found in the exoskeletons of arthropods or insects. So for example, we've got our locust here, and you can see the exoskeleton that it's shedding, and that's all formed from chitin. And if you've ever stepped on like a beetle or something and heard that crunch, that's the chitin that's crunching. Also lobsters and crabs, their shell is made out of chitin as well. And then the fungi, they have cell walls also made out of chitin, which is kind of interesting.